right, can you hear me? Lee, let me know when we're live. Okay. Are we? Good evening. Can you turn off your mic? Okay. Yeah. Welcome to the regularly scheduled meeting of, just a moment. Hers is on and that's what I'm hearing. Okay. Welcome to the regularly scheduled meeting of the City of Elmhurst Zoning and Planning Commission. In light of the pandemic, we have a different procedure, so I first need to make sure everyone can hear me. So, in the applicant room, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes.
Great. Commissioner Callaway, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Commissioner Snyder, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Court reporter Kiki Andriopoulos, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Commissioner Burns, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Commissioner Hoffman, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Commissioner Uditsky, can you hear me?
Yes.
Commissioner Garland, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Commissioner Pittman, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Mr. Mark Daniel, can you hear me? I can't hear you because you're muted.
Yes, I can. Good evening.
Good evening. City Attorney Andy Acker, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Thank you. Assistant City Manager Mike Kopp in the public comment room, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Mr. Bill Fergus, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Someone by the name of Brendan, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great. Rachel Robert, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Samuel Figueroa, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great. Michael Mondes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
And Eric Johnson, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Excellent. Okay, I'm going to ask Emily Egan to call the roll to establish a quorum.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Burns.
Here.
Commissioner Callaway. Here. Commissioner Garland.
Here.
Commissioner Hoffman.
Here.
Commissioner McCoy is absent. Commissioner Pittman. Here. Commissioner Snyder.
Here.
Commissioner Uditsky.
Here.
Chair Rose.
Here. We have a quorum. First item of business is public comment. This is a time when anyone can make a comment on any issue of zoning that happens to be on their mind. I want to make sure everyone understands, however, that if you make a public comment at this point in the agenda about the case for which we will be deliberating tonight, none of your public comments will be a part of the public record. We've had extensive public comment on this case. I counted up today, I think over 15 hours of that. So we've had significant public comment. You are welcome to make a comment, but I will advise you that it will not be a part of the record. And we are obligated to not consider your comments in our deliberation tonight. So just so you understand that. I also want to, at this point in public comment, make people know that this is really the only place where the only point in our agenda where you're really going to be able to make any comments at all. We as a commission have sat and listened to many, many hours of that, which has been very, very instructive and helpful to us. So if you don't make a comment at this point, but somehow at some point want to make an ad hoc impromptu comment, I will probably warn you at first that you would be out of order. And I would ask you to not do that. If anyone was really moved and persisted and wanted to do that again, we would probably then cut you off from this particular recording, and you could continue watching the deliberations live on YouTube. So just want to make sure everybody is aware of that. So that sounds like I don't want people to talk, but I really do. So if you have a public comment, I would welcome it at this point. Is there anyone who has a comment that they would like to make about any issue of zoning? Okay. Mike Kopp in the public comment room. Is there anyone there who wishes to make a public comment?
No, there is not.
Emily, can I ask you to please check email and voicemail? Okay.
I checked email. There are no emails in the planning info email.
Okay. Emily Egan will be checking voicemail. This is one of the oddities of the pandemic that we have to stop for a few minutes and allow city staff to check voicemail in case someone chooses to call in and give public comment at this point. So if you'll just bear with us for the next 30 seconds, we should have an answer on that.
Chair Rose,
Okay.
we do not have any public comments on voicemail or email.
Okay, we will then move on to the next item of business, which is receipt of written communications. I would ask if there are any other written communications that we have received about this case that are not on board docs. There's extensive material on board docs. I'm assuming everyone has had an opportunity to look at those. Much of this was stuff that we covered as well. So I am not seeing any written communication. Okay, we will then move on to business before the committee. First item of business before the committee is approval of the minutes of the May 4th, 2021 meeting, Zoning and Planning Commission, Zoning Board of Appeals meeting. Can I get a motion to approve and a second? Commissioner Callaway moves, Commissioner Pittman seconds. Anyone wishes to make any additions, corrections, or deletions to those minutes? Okay, seeing none, I will ask Emily Egan to please call the roll for approval of the minutes.
Commissioner Callaway,
Yes.
Commissioner Pittman,
Yes.
Commissioner Burns,
Yes.
Commissioner Garland,
Yes.
Commissioner Hoffman,
Yes.
Commissioner Snyder,
Yes.
Commissioner Uditsky,
Yes.
Chair Rose.
Yes. The minutes are approved. Thank you. The next item of business is case 20P19, Marisi Roberto's conditional use permits and administrative subdivisions, Eggleston and Spring, which is for deliberation this evening. Before we start, before I request a motion from one of the commissioners to place this on the table, I want to make sure everyone understands that this is the first stage of a three-stage process. The role of the Zoning and Planning Commission is really to look at the standards for conditional use and ask ourselves, ask the applicants, ask the material, ask of the material that we have read and received. Does the applicant's request meet all 7 of the standards for conditional use? So we have basically 2 conditional use permits in front of us, 2 conditional use requests in front of us. The second stage of this is really where it will go to the Development, Planning, and Zoning Committee, and the third stage is where it goes to the City Council. I want to be clear that those 2 bodies, the committee and the full council, their responsibility is to look at this as well from a position of policy. So if there have been questions that were raised, issues that were raised that are really more a matter of policy as opposed to evidence or as opposed to information around whether the petitioner meets the 7 standards, we will not be considering those. But Development, Planning, and Zoning Committee and the City Council certainly may be considering those. So I want to make sure everyone understands that. We are not a policy-making body. Our responsibility is really to look very narrowly but comprehensively at these 7 standards for use and ask in both of these petitions, is that the case? In front of us, we have 2 conditional use permit requests and then a plat of subdivision consolidation to consolidate lots at 283 West Eggleston and a plat of subdivision to consolidate lots at 272 West Eggleston with 276 West Eggleston. So I guess let me look towards Eileen to ask if for some reason the recommendation fails for conditional use permits for either one of those, would we still consider those plats of subdivision?
So actually the plats of subdivision are administrative. You're really only considering the conditional use permit.
Okay, good. So, all right, that being said, what I would like to entertain is a motion from a commissioner to approve. I'm going to ask actually for a motion to approve both of these. We'll do 2 motions and 2 seconds. Really one to look at the parking lot at 283 West Eggleston and the other at 272 and 276, so that those will both be on the table and we can discuss them as a whole. We will then vote on them separately and can discuss them separately, but I'd like to get them both on the table because I think they are of a whole. So can I have a motion to approve the conditional use permit first to construct and operate a surface parking lot at 283 West Eggleston? Commissioner Burns, and a second? And a second to that? Commissioner Snyder, thank you. And then can I get a motion to approve and a second for a conditional use permit to construct and operate a surface parking lot at 272 and 276 West Eggleston? Can I have a motion to approve and a second? Commissioner Burns moves to And a second, did I see, is that Commissioner Garland? Did I see your hand? Commissioner Garland seconds that. So let me ask Commissioner Burns, and I want to make sure we have a full discussion. So let me let him start this discussion, and then we will continue on with that. Commissioner Burns.
Thank you, Chair Rose. As we've all experienced through the many days of public hearing, there's quite a wealth of materials and concepts. And I think in my presentation, rather than go through every single one of the 7 conditional use subsections and completely go through it from my own perspective and then finish and hand it up, I think I'll go into the first one, if that's all right with you, Chair Rose, and then we can have a fuller discussion of each standard sequentially.
I would absolutely agree with that. Thank you.
So there are a few threshold issues I'd like to bring up before we even get to the standards. One is that there was a lot of ink expended on the topic of whether the parking is needed. If you read the 7 conditional use standards, none of the standards require that the applicant show that they need the parking. The conditional use form asks the applicant to provide a statement of project impact in need. They're asking for that statement. So if they make those statements, I assume that the form is made properly. But for our purposes, we are considering the 7 conditional use standards, none of which explicitly talk about need. So all of the interesting discussion about whether there's enough parking or not enough parking for Roberto's business operations, I believe is material for DPZ and the City Council to entertain if they wish, but it's not part of our agenda tonight. And I'm not trying to shove off a difficult or heavy lifting topic. I generally don't think that it's part of the 7 conditional use standards. Now, having said that, we still can address issues like traffic and traffic impacts if they speak to one of the 7 standards. But the whole part, whether the parking is needed, I don't think that's part of our analysis. Then another threshold issue that was brought up by the objectors and by Mr. Daniel was whether this is even a conditional use, or whether these two are, whether they're conditional uses. And Mr. Daniel made the point that parking is not recited as a conditional use in the R2 zoning district or the R4 zoning district, which is true if you go to those sections of our zoning ordinance. R2 lists the permitted uses and the conditional uses, and R4 does the same. However, in what I'm going to call the scenic language about parking spaces within 300 feet, it distinctly says, or are located in a residence district, and now I'm going to make a verbal ellipsis, that must be first approved in accordance with section 22.26. Section 22.26 is the conditional use section of our zoning ordinance. So I would submit that any use that needs to meet the conditional use standards is itself a conditional use. And I believe this is the interpretation that staff has made. And I believe city attorney has agreed with this. So that's one threshold issue. Another threshold issue is whether a parking lot is a structure. And if it's a structure, this would go to whether it meets the zoning requirements. So actually, maybe we'll leave that to whether it meets the zoning requirements of the district. Okay, so the first standard is that the establishment, maintenance, or operation of the conditional use will not be detrimental to or endanger the public health, safety, morals, comfort, or general welfare. And this is probably the meat of the objections. The applicant's response, and I'll just read it. As referenced in the project impact statement, approval of fully code compliant accessory parking lots with landscaped side yards, code compliant lighting, see lighting plan attached as Exhibit 16, and fencing if desired by neighboring homeowners will serve the public good, converting unbuildable flood-prone properties into surface parking lots with code-compliant stormwater storage improvements will generate commercially viable land use at a location where no alternative use is viable because of flood regulations. We then had testimony from Michael Mondis of Space Co. We had rebuttal testimony from Randall Buss of SEMCON. We got into some issues which for our purpose might be somewhat arcane, such as whether the tributary area of the flood bowl that the spring in Eggleston sits in is 20 acres or greater than 20 acres or less than 20 acres. Mr. Buss opined that DuPage County would probably not approve this project, but he didn't cite any parallel circumstances that would support that conclusion. The city engineer, Kent Johnson, supplied a document to board docs, which indicated that he had discussed this issue with DuPage County staff, and DuPage County staff felt that the authorization would not come from DuPage County, but from the city of Elmhurst, and that the city's stormwater standards were sufficient. I feel the primary issue with public health, safety, morals, comfort, and general welfare is probably the traffic issue. There are other issues that were raised, such as there would be noise, there would be intrusive lighting, perhaps crime would be generated from the use of these lots. The lighting, I think, was satisfied by the lighting study that was submitted and staff confirmation that the limit of 2-foot candles at the project boundaries was observed in the plan submitted. And there was no rebuttal on the lighting per se. There was no engineering document that rebutted that or any other competent evidence against it that I saw. The issue of screening, I don't think we should leave it to the applicant to test whether the neighbors want landscape screening or a fence. I think we should make it a condition that these lots be fenced with fully opaque fencing to a sufficient height, which we can discuss as to what the sufficient height would be. If they want to add landscaping to that, that's fine, but I think a fully opaque fence would be necessary. The issue of traffic here is mostly whether these lots would induce additional traffic east of Spring Road over to Argyle, where Argyle crosses the tracks. The testimony of Louis Abuna of KLOA was that he thought the establishment of these parking lots would not change the capacity ability of Eggleston, which may be true that is a local collector street, Eggleston could still function adequately in terms of capacity, but it still doesn't tell us whether there might be sufficient additional traffic that would be relevant to our first standard, being detrimental to public health, safety, morals, comfort, or general welfare. The traffic that would come to Roberto's, I believe, and I've lived in Elmhurst for 27 years and been to Roberto's many times. I believe most of the traffic comes along Spring Road. The people who would come down Argyle, cross the tracks and come west on Eggleston would probably be people who live in the area bounded by York Road to the east and St. Charles to the north. Anyone further east or north or south or west would probably take the faster roads, not the side streets, St. Charles or Butterfield or whatever it would be, get on Spring Road and make your way to the Roberto's area. Now, it's possible that by establishing parking lots on these two sites, that in addition to the traffic that already goes to Roberto's by coming down Argyle and then west on Eggleston, and we have to suppose that there are some people who do that already. If the question is, what is the increment that would be induced by these parking lots? That's a very hard question to answer. But my feeling is it would not be very substantial. I've never actually gone that route to Roberto's myself. It's much easier to go up and down Spring Road. But now if we look at the other circumstances where there are parking lots adjacent to residential areas, we've got a few of them that was cited in the staff memo at 1041, 1021, and 1015. I think it's cited as Riverside Drive, but it's actually the frontage road. It's Tree Towns, CE Rentals, and then the next building north. And their back parking areas are in the residential district, but there's no communication. When I say communication, I mean there's no traffic communication between the lots at 1041, 1021, and 1015 and the residential areas to the east. There's fencing, shrubbery, and all the traffic goes out on the frontage road. And the only way to get to the residential areas, you have to drive down south and then turn up onto Riverside where it's the residential street. So that's really not comparable to our situation here, where the proposed parking lots would have ingress and egress right onto Eggleston, the residential street. Now, there were a few examples. I think the commissioners saw the email from City Planner Franz earlier today. I had asked about the Guac and Tacos site and the Fry the Coop site. So if you look at the published zoning map and compare it to the DuPage parcel viewer, it seemed to me that the south half of the Guac and Taco building, there's actually a two-tenant building. Guac and Tacos is in the east half of that building. The south half of that building and all of the parking lots south of them looks like it's in an R district. And only the frontage on North Avenue is in the C district. The south side of that parking lot has a high wooden opaque fence, and then there's residential single family property to the south. City Planner Franz indicated that before the 1992 remapping in the new zoning ordinance, oh no, that's still being investigated. I'm sorry, there's no conclusion on that. Whether we don't know if it's a mapping error or something else, but that's what the map actually shows. At Fry the Coop, which is in a building that's at the northwest corner of North Avenue and River Glen, just east of 83, the entire parking lot north of the building, or almost the entire parking lot, except for the first tier of parking north of the building. The rest of that parking lot is in an R district. According to City Planner Franz, before the 1992 ordinance and remap, that was designated as public use area. So it's possible that the parking lot was there before it got remapped to residential. There is 90-degree parking facing north at the north end of that parking lot. There's an 8-foot white plastic opaque fence between the parking lot and the houses to the north. The driveway out of that parking lot onto River Glen has a sign. There's a stop sign and another sign that says right turn only. But there's no engineering of egress that would prevent anyone from turning north on River Glen, where there are houses. Although River Glen then dead ends, so I'm not sure how many people would go that direction. So my point in saying all this is there are a few examples of commercial parking that are directly adjacent to residential districts. But this is the only one, I believe, where there is full, or would be full access from the parking lots onto a residential street improved with residential houses. The reason I bring this up is that Attorney Scott Day brought up the Chicago Heights versus Living Word decision, which he suggested to us tells us that anything that is identified as a conditional use in the ordinance is, by dint of that decision, considered to be legislatively determined as compatible and could only be denied if there were unique factors that wouldn't obtain elsewhere, if the same use was proposed somewhere else in that same kind of a district. So what I'm suggesting is that there are unique aspects to this site that are not replicated anywhere else in the city. So I believe there are zoning standards, the 7 standards still apply. We still have to make a careful analysis of each one and determine whether we think that the subjects, the application and demonstrations have been sufficient. So that's all I have to say about the first standard. So if anybody else wants to chime in, I'd welcome it.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Burns. And I want to emphasize part of what you're saying, which were my opening remarks as well, that there are certain things that have been raised that are policy issues, and that being, is there enough parking? That's a policy issue. That's not a land use issue for us to consider as part of this, our standards. So let me ask Commissioner Snyder. I'm going to ask you if you want to comment. Why don't we just comment on this first standard?
Yes, thank you, Chair Rose. Thank you to Commissioner Burns for your thorough summary and evaluation of the standard. I really spent a lot of time thinking about how to objectively evaluate the proposed parking lots against the standard, because it does seem to some degree that there's subjectivity involved in making this determination. However, I think that to the end of evaluating it, the unique characteristics of the area and the unique characteristics of the proposed parking lots themselves within the context of the neighborhood really provide a critical framework for more objective evaluation. I think that we've certainly seen examples of parking lots that coexist next to and within residential neighborhoods. However, you know, as Commissioner Burns pointed out, there's some very unique aspects to this particular case. All parking lots, that is the design, the use, the accessibility, the circulation patterns, the hours of operation, the uses served, et cetera, of any particular given parking lot, and the surrounding context or relationship of those parking lots to the neighborhood are not created equal. And as a result, the outcomes and impacts can really vary quite widely. So this particular area around Eggleston and Spring really has some very unique characteristics. Eggleston itself is a more narrow street. Parking is prohibited on Eggleston itself. I believe it was mentioned during testimony during the hearing that that was a result of the street being more narrow than the typical street that we see. The existing R2 and R4 residential uses are bound by a rail line on the northeast, and that rail line runs northwest southeast, and Eggleston provides the primary access to these mixed residential uses. Moving on. Eggleston is also only 450 feet long, that particular segment where these two proposed parking lots are going to be, are proposed to go. So the west end is an unsignalized intersection where it meets Spring that in and of itself is not unique. However, that in relationship to the rest of the design of the area is what makes it unique. So on the east end of that 450-foot segment of Eggleston, there's a 90-degree L-shaped juncture that's shared with Argyle Street, where the aforementioned railway crossing is just another approximately 125 feet north of that junction. So it really creates a very sort of unique enclave, and it's more restrictive. It's not, you have to be careful as you're moving through that area in light of the rail line, the short segment of street, the narrow street. And I think that does in fact impact traffic patterns and the way that people move through that area. And then, so looking at the unique characteristics of the area and then the unique characteristics of the proposed parking lots themselves, as Commissioner Burns mentioned, the two lots would be accessed exclusively by way of Eggleston and would require diverting the majority of the traffic onto Eggleston, where the ingress and egress of both of these lots are concentrated at a single point on Eggleston. And that concentration is really near the west boundary of the aforementioned mixed residential uses near the unsignalized T intersection with Spring. So Roberto's customers seeking parking in either of those lots must in every case turn onto the short residential segment of Eggleston just to see if parking is in fact available. And it appears as though all parking spaces in the north lot would be visible from Eggleston. So if parking is not available, cars in Eggleston could either enter the south lot to seek parking or find a place to turn around or continue east on Eggleston through the residential area. So really I'm trying to think about new traffic patterns that might be developing as a result of these two lots. Now the L-shaped design of the proposed south lot, and I know we have two motions for the north lot and the south lot, but I'm really having a hard time separating them because they work in conjunction with one another. So I just like to talk about that as well. So the L-shaped design of the proposed south lot is not fully visible from Eggleston. So vehicles may be required to enter the lot to assess availability, and if the lot is full, they would then have to perform a 3-point turnaround in order to exit the lot, because neither lot, but particularly that lot, does not have through access or continuous circulation. So neither of these lots being designed for continuous circulation or circular flow of traffic, they both have a single access point on Eggleston. So I think there will be some adverse impact in terms of how that traffic moves through that residential street. And I think that is of concern to the people who live there currently. So, sort of synthesizing all these unique characteristics, I came to some of the following conclusions. And one is that street capacity alone is not dispositive as to whether new traffic patterns resulting from the construction of these proposed parking lots would injure the neighborhood or otherwise harm the public health, safety, morals, comfort, or general welfare. And number two, that the fact that the street can physically handle more traffic does not alone determine whether the neighborhood can handle more traffic or whether there is an endangerment to the public health, safety, morals, comfort, or general welfare. Number three, while there's not necessarily an issue of street capacity, there is an issue of livability and the infringement of commercial activity within a residential area in light of these unique characteristics, the unique design, unique layout of this area, and the unique characteristics and layout of the two proposed parking lots. So I would be very interested to hear my fellow commissioners' assessment as well. I think that there is a lot here to consider, and that it really isn't entirely fair to look at other commercial parking that is on residential uses, because it's not apples to apples. They really are. This area really does have unique characteristics that need to be carefully considered. And anyway, so I'm curious to hear what my fellow commissioners think as well.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Snyder. Anyone else want to make comment on this particular, for either one of the conditional use? Commissioner Garland? Did I see your hand up? Commissioner Garland.
I was having trouble getting it off mute. Thanks, Chair Rose. And not surprisingly, extraordinarily thorough job by Commissioner Burns and Commissioner Snyder. And while you wouldn't think that I would have things to add after all of that, I have a couple of things that I'd like to kind of throw into the mix. And so, this was an emotional case for a lot of really, really good reasons. And I think that what's already been laid out as we've started this conversation is that there are some really unique circumstances here. And so, I really struggled with this, and I struggled with this particular use standard in particular. And so, and in a perfect world, to just look at the recommendation in a vacuum and not, potentially consider the neighborhood relationship, I think would ordinarily be the course of business. But I think that, that it's been clearly established that the relationship between the petitioner and the neighbors is pretty contentious. And there's not a lot of trust, if any, there. And I think that has held true over a period of time based on how the petitioner has operated the business, how that they cared for the vacant home. And I think that the neighbors probably with good reason have, are struggling to kind of take in this matter of trust as it relates to how these parking lots would not just be installed, but how they would be operated going forward. And so I think that it's this relationship that I'm really struggling with, because I think that, in a vacuum and looking at a particular standard or a land use, we can talk about the black and white issues. I struggle with that. It could become injurious. It could be the public welfare, public health and safety, morals could be an issue, and only exacerbated by this lack of trust and how the petitioner has conducted themselves within that neighborhood. And so I wrestle with it. I try to disconnect it and be really objective about this, but I'm having a hard time disconnecting those two issues as it relates to this issue. And I believe that just as a practical matter, that there are going to be traffic implications. And I think that as Commissioner Snyder is so well articulated, that this is a small little enclave, and any increase in traffic there's going to be some significant implications on what is happening within that neighborhood, particularly as they're coming south turning left out of the east lot, or turning right out of the south lot onto Eggleston, particularly if there gets to be a bit of a traffic jam of those folks turning towards Spring Road and trying to get out onto Spring Road, which can be a challenge on Eggleston, particularly if you're turning left or going south on Spring Road. So I believe that the threshold issues that Commissioner Burns laid out are important, and I think are help to kind of frame this. And so I appreciate that, Commissioner Burns. And I'm just really trying to sit with this tension point of the development of these and this first standard and the relationship between the petitioner, the historical relationship between the petitioner and the neighbors, which likely suggests the future relationship between the petitioner and the neighbors. And so that's kind of where I've landed on this. So.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Garland. Commissioner Uditsky.
First I want to reiterate what Commissioner Garland said. Commissioner Burns and Commissioner Snyder did a wonderful job really laying this out, I think, from a technical perspective, but I also want to take a little bit of a step back. And while I do agree that whether or not additional parking is needed is a policy decision, I'd echo something that Commissioner Garland said, which is we also don't look at these requests in a vacuum, right? And that this area is a very unique area. It is uniquely dense for being so tightly surrounded by residential a residential neighborhood. And if you, and I guess I want to take a little bit of a step back and look at this more from a community perspective and maybe a little bit more of an anecdotal perspective, which is if you've ever driven down Spring Road on Thursday at the end of the day or Friday at the end of the day, it is extremely busy. And in particular, in front of Roberto's there, where you're coming off of basically a four-way stop. You have the Prairie Path coming across. There's a tremendous amount of traffic, that's coming both ways. And then people walking across the street to go to the restaurant. And they're also parking in front and picking up pizzas and, and whatnot. I know I've personally almost taken people's doors off, right? Because it's also very, very tight. So while I agree that, yes, that's a policy decision, at the same time, I think just again, echoing what Commissioner Garland said, is we don't look at these in a vacuum. We're not robots, and we just don't, look at this and say, well, it has this, it doesn't have this, that it's not all, black and white. And in fact, I would almost argue when this first came on our radar, my first reaction was, oh yes, this is absolutely needed. Well, why is it needed? It's needed because there is so much traffic there. Now, going back to what I think Commissioner Burns said is, people that come to Roberto's, is the addition of these parking lots going to somehow increase the traffic there such that it will be injurious? In terms of traffic volume itself. And I just don't really see that the addition of these parking lots is somehow going to increase their traffic, 50% or add that many more cars. It's really just redirecting. And I think, as Commissioner Snyder indicated, redirecting the traffic flow and where is it going to go? But I guess my point in bringing this up is that, again, while it is a policy decision, yes, but I don't think that we can just ignore, the need. The need is based on the fact that that area is unique. It is extremely tight. It is probably overly trafficked, right, for the location of it and perhaps the capacity. And so I look at this and I ask myself, okay, would the addition of these two parking lots provide any relief there in terms of, just that Spring Road district right there? And certainly I think we have to look at the standards and whether or not it would be injurious. And I think Commissioner Snyder brought up a good thing, like I didn't really think about before, in terms of these lots are sort of dead end lots. And so if they are full, how do you, turn around, in and out of there? And does that, increase traffic? Do people go back out onto Spring Road, or are they going to go and say, well, forget it, I'm just not going to go. I'm going to go to some other restaurant or something like that. And then they go down Eggleston and, and leave the area. But again, my point being, I don't think that we could just look at it in a vacuum, and that we do have to recognize that that area, it is a problem.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Uditsky. Okay, anyone else on the commission want to make a comment on this particular standard? Or let me include, really, I think when we think about this standard and the next one, conditional use won't be injurious to use and enjoyment of other property in the immediate vicinity for the purposes already permitted, or substantially diminish and impair property values within the neighborhood. That has the unique addition of property values, but it also has this notion of use and enjoyment of your property. So if you want to make a comment on that standard as well as the first one. Anyone else have any comments they wanted to make on that? Okay, Commissioner Snyder?
Thank you, Chair Rose. So are you asking us to also comment on the second standard then?
Sure.
As well? Oh, okay. I do want to follow up on something that Commissioner Uditsky said, and that he doesn't see any sort of significant impactful increase in traffic. And I really don't think when we're talking about standard number one, we're talking about the traffic, that that's not what's at issue. I think what's at issue is new traffic patterns that are generated as a result of these two new lots and how that's going to impact the area. So, just looking at the street capacity, as KOLA has pointed out, can handle it, but whether the neighborhood can handle it and whether the neighborhood can really handle these new traffic patterns in relationship to all of the unique characteristics, I think that's what's at issue, and that's what we all need to really consider. I do see that how the standard number 1 and standard number 2, I did kind of think about these hand in hand because the issue of being injurious to use and enjoyment of other property in the immediate vicinity. So, this particular standard number 2 is really a 2-part standard. Regarding the diminished and impaired property values, I agree with the applicant that we've seen significant evidence throughout Elmhurst that property values are not necessarily substantially diminished or impaired due to neighboring commercial uses or parking lots. It might become more challenging to find the right buyer, but really we've seen new home construction bordering commercial uses and parking lots. And the applicant did submit quite substantial evidence demonstrating that for the most part, property values will not be substantially harmed. And in part, this is a testament really to the desirability of our community, that people are kind of willing to make these concessions at any rate. So that part of the standard I feel is met, and really the first part of the standard about being tied to or being injurious to the use and enjoyment of other property in the vicinity, evaluating the standard, I really think it's not necessarily the presence of the parking lot itself that would be injurious to the use and enjoyment of neighboring properties. We've seen parking lots woven into neighborhoods and neighboring homes that have not really impacted their quality of life or proven injurious in any way. However, what I believe is at issue here is the type of use the parking lots serve, as well as the hours of operation in relationship to the orientation and number of parking spaces that are in close proximity to the neighboring homes. Now, Roberto's is open 7 days a week. They serve alcohol, and they have expressly indicated a desire to use the parking lots until 1 a.m. And more than half of all of their proposed parking spots border the neighboring homes. So that really is something I think is important to consider. Now, we as a commission have the ability to restrict hours of operation, but I don't really believe that's practical, because doing so would really be in conflict with Roberto's hours of operation. And I don't see how Roberto's would be motivated to really self-enforce such a parking restriction, because it would really mean prematurely clearing out paying customers, which just isn't practical. And in light of their business operations, I believe that enforcement could really easily become an ongoing issue of concern day in and day out for neighbors. And as Commissioner Garland pointed out, this long history of conflict between Roberto's and the neighbors doesn't really bode well for, this going forward, because we're adding in new elements, we're adding in new concerns for the neighbors to really have to deal with. So, based on those property maintenance issues and the code violations that were really pretty well illustrated in the testimony we heard, there were submitted photographs. I can also see, the same enforcement concern applying to any condition we might impose on screening, fencing, or landscaping, which all do require sort of regular ongoing maintenance over time. So this issue of, good faith and trust and being a good neighbor, I really feel works not well with this proposal. I think it adds a real layer of challenge that could present as an ongoing livability, lifestyle, life impacting issue. It's not like a one and done. They're operating 7 days a week till 1 a.m. Is what they've asked to have those parking lots operating until. So I do kind of feel like these restrictions or conditions that we might consider imposing would mean an unreasonable burden on the affected neighbors, who would really become tasked with enforcing it, contacting the city, following up. And as Mr. Day mentioned, and his testimony possibly seeking legal recourse by filing a cause of action. These are all sort of, you know, when you're dealing with this day in and day out, it becomes really a burden and really diminishes your quality of life. And so ultimately, you know, I kind of believe these two parking lots, due to the late hours of operation, the use served, the orientation and number of parking spaces near the homes, would really impact the neighbor's ability to get a peaceful night's sleep. So I think, you know, that's really a big issue for me in terms of this particular standard. And I would love to hear from the other commissioners on it.
Other commissioners who have a comment on this? I know Commissioner Burns had his hand up, but are others? Commissioner Burns?
Thank you. Yeah, I had thought about the hours of operation issue as well. I know that the lot that the city has on the west side of Spring Road is posted, if I remember right, for use until 2 a.m. Of course, that's behind the Spring Inn. Or no, I mean, it's the bar across the street. I'm getting my bars mixed up, but I do think you could have an hours restriction. I don't think it would impact Roberto's use that much. And here's what I'm thinking. If we were to say, all right, by some hour, 10, 11 o'clock, in other words, if we're thinking, look, you don't want somebody's car door opening and then shutting the door, starting a car at 1 a.m. right next to someone's house. Okay, so if we said maybe 10, 11 p.m., something like that, yeah, the lots could be fitted with stanchions or something where you could then bring a chain across and say, okay, you know, the lots are closed, or maybe that's not exactly what would work, but basically just tell your customers by 10 o'clock at night, you know, that's the latest hour, because maybe cars would come in. By that hour, there's going to be a lot of parking on Spring Road, right? Most of the dinner traffic, I would think, is going to be earlier than 10 or 11 at night. Obviously, they're open later, so you have later dining, people using the bar area or whatever. But I think that we could entertain some hours of operation limitation. And then on the traffic patterns, this discussion does kind of jump ahead to subsection E, which is the one about ingress and egress for traffic.
Go right ahead.
But I'll just put this out there. One thing I was considering is that the ingress and egress to these lots be physically configured so that you could only enter eastbound from Spring and only exit westbound to Spring. I'm sure all of you can think of gas stations on busy streets or whatever, where it's right in, right out only, and they have sort of a triangular raised concrete area that points you in the direction that they want you to go. And it makes it very difficult to turn against it. So there could be some design element there, along with a sign saying, note from the south lot, no right turns, from the north lot, no left turns. In other words, confine as much as possible the traffic to an area from Spring Road to the parking lots and back and forth. I mean, there's going to be some leakage probably, but I think that's something we could consider as a condition to build the lots in such a way that that traffic would be forced to only come in from Spring and only go out to Spring. As far as the turnaround in the parking lot, the original designs didn't allow for that, and I think that's something Sam Schwartz noticed. And the applicant did revise the parking lot plans to allow a turnaround area at the end of each parking lot. It's not like a round area, but there's enough space where somebody could pull in and do a 3-point turn without it being too tight and get out. It would be a unique pattern. There's no doubts about it, but I think there's some ways we could try to keep that traffic between Spring and the parking lots.
Thank you. Commissioner Pittman.
Thank you, Chair Rose. I agree with Commissioner Burns regarding the conditions. I think that there would be numerous conditions that would be required in order for this to work, to even consider making this work. You know, I agree with Commissioner Snyder that this is a very unique situation on a very unique road. And the question is, can we put conditions on these parking lots in order to make it work? I think we'd have to do what Commissioner Burns stated about the ingress and egress. The goal would be to keep traffic away from turning right, heading east on Eggleston, no matter what the situation, and to push everything onto Spring. I think that some of the things I was thinking about as well, you know, would there be a benefit to having one parking lot be an employee parking lot and another parking lot being open? Would there be a benefit to certain parking spaces in either of those lots being employee parking only versus open to patrons? I definitely think some sort of time restriction would be necessary as well. I don't think it's reasonable to say that people are going to be parking till 1 a.m. In some of those parking locations, given that there's homes right next to those parking spaces. I do think that there's potentially a solution, though, in terms of requiring some of these conditions. And there may be some growing pains in the beginning in monitoring how these things are working and making sure patrons understand where they can and can't park, and figuring out some solutions. But I do think there's the potential for something to be put in place to make these parking spaces work. Again, I think it's necessary. I don't think that the parking lots work as proposed. There has to be some restrictions put in place. That's my thoughts.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Commissioner Uditsky.
So I would just caution and maybe show of hands how many people have come off of Eggleston and made either a left or tried to make a left or a right onto Spring Road. If you've ever done that on a Thursday night, a Friday night, you know, a Saturday, you'll know that forcing people to go and everybody coming out of that parking lot to make that could potentially be dangerous as well. So it's very tight. There's cars parked right, you know, almost up until the you know, the corner there. So I would just caution, you know, that as well, because I do think that can be dangerous in and of itself.
Anyone else before I go to Commissioner Snyder? Commissioner Snyder.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that the south lot in particular really relies on the alleyway. So I am not sure about the feasibility of installing some sort of a traffic diverting elements as Commissioner Burns had suggested. Anyway, I thought it was important to remind everyone that this is not just independent. This south parking lot is not operating independently. It really is heavily reliant on the alleyway for ingress and egress.
Commissioner Burns. Commissioner Burns, you're muted.
Yes, so I guess we're hearing traffic on York Road now, but
yes, you are.
It's a good point from Commissioner Snyder. And that did occur to me, and I meant to put it into my direct presentation, I forgot. Yeah, that little stub of the alley coming south of Eggleston, I think we should require that there not be just random ingress and egress from the south parking lot into that alley. Like if somebody's parked in a 90-degree spot pointed toward the alley, that they just pull forward into the alley and leave. There's got to be some separation, a high enough median to prevent that for people coming in and out and using that alley as if it was part of the parking lot. Because it's not, it's a public right of way. If Roberto's wants to use it that way, they can certainly petition for vacation as they did for the alley north of Eggleston previously.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else? Let me just throw this open for comments about any one of the standards. I mean, I think that, I certainly think standards 1 and 2 are significant. I think standard 4, adequate utilities, I think really was responded to best by our staff, who really have said that the applicant's plan is in conformity with city code, and that I'll go back to, it's a basic principle that they have set out that parking lots are not considered structures, that in the city of Elmhurst, we don't consider them a structure. And that's a key piece of this. If you buy that, then I think that standard 4 certainly has been met. But let me throw it open for other comments about any one of these standards. Commissioner Garland.
Thanks. If you want to complete your thought, please do.
No, go right ahead.
Okay. So the other standards, I guess I didn't struggle with them as not nearly as much, and felt like I could align around standards 3 through 7, and could argue that those would be met. And so I would go back to the struggle is 1 and 2. And I think that, outside of the property value component that Commissioner Snyder had raised, I think that it was difficult. I had difficulty kind of completely separating those and looking at those completely independently. And so, because I thought that there was a fair bit of overlap, but I have to say, and just to reinforce the point that Commissioner Uditsky laid out, when they park on the east side of Spring, south of Eggleston, all the way up to the corner almost, I got to tell you, that's a little bit of a death trap trying to make a left and go south on Spring Road from Eggleston. It is a real challenge. And so I would agree that, funneling everything out that way, could become problematic, and create some really unique challenges of its own. But I think the idea is that in spirit is a really good one, to preserve that eastbound Eggleston, the traffic that would be moving down there. I think that there's some unintended consequences of that, sitting right there on Spring Road at the corner of Spring and Eggleston there. So I just wanted to kind of lay that out. And I do believe that if there's a decision to kind of move forward, that there's some pretty hardcore conditional use elements that we should wrap around this, that could potentially address the ingress egress elements, the type of fencing. I would submit that any parking spot that's facing a house have one of those large concrete posts put in front of it to address some of the safety issues and concerns that some of the neighbors had. Clearly that there's got to be some pretty strict lighting restrictions that would be put on it as well to preserve the neighbors' use and enjoyment.
Sure. Commissioner Callaway.
Thanks, Chair Rose. Yeah, I would, couple of things, and I think that I appreciate that my fellow commissioners are very thoughtful about this and have spent obviously a lot of hours poring over the materials. So I would agree that this is by no means an easy matter that we have before us. I would just add 2 things. One is that, looking at the other standards, I'm challenged by standard 5 as well. And I do think that that's been addressed. That one really kind of ties heavily to the traffic issues that have been discussed, specifically that adequate measures have been or will be taken to provide ingress and egress so designed as to minimize traffic congestion in the public streets. And I think that one hits right on to the issues raised by Commissioner Snyder in terms of, getting in and out of the parking lot if it is in fact full, and potentially, pulling more traffic onto Eggleston. The other thing that the point where I want to make and kind of addressing what Commissioner Burns has raised about potentially putting some stipulations on the use of these lots. The one thing that I was a little troubled by was the fact that at one point we were told that, these lots could be used until 1 o'clock in the morning. And that being because, once the restaurant is closed and if there's staff in those lots or, people are obviously the restaurant's open till the late hours. Once cars are in those lots, I think that becomes problematic. And somebody might come in at 9 o'clock, which is a reasonable hour on a Friday or Saturday night. But, how do you get those cars out of there at a reasonable hour? And I think that provides a real challenge in terms of trying to come up with some acceptable stipulations for the use of those lots. It's just, there's, short of a guard or it being a valet lot, I think it's really difficult to really kind of come up with a solution to, to making sure that those lots are no longer in use at a reasonable time, for the nearby residents.
Thank you. Anyone else want to make a comment? I just want to comment on some of the traffic stuff myself, because I think that commissioners ourselves may have been creating traffic congestion by how many times we've been down there. I was down there again today, driving around, and so people may get tired of seeing us driving around there. I think there's two issues here that are related, but they're not exactly the same. One is, Commissioner Snyder talked about it, and I think Commissioner Burns did as well, and Commissioner Uditsky, this notion of people late at night coming to their car, turning their car on, lights are on, people have just had a great time at Roberto's, talking. People who are drinking don't realize how loud they talk. I mean, the truth is that is the way it is. So that's one thing. Some of that can be mitigated by some safety stuff that we do, fencing, lighting. I think that's the nature of the beast. The one though I think is, I want to discuss is this notion of people turning down Eggleston, and that is egregious for the neighborhood. That concerns me in some ways to say that our neighborhoods, really, those are city streets. Anyone can go on them. And they're not meant to be park-like streets. People drive down them all the time. So, I mean, I think KLOA gave us some sense that it's not going to be such an increase in traffic on there that we're not going to have, 300 cars a day driving down Eggleston. That's not what we're going to see. There may be some increase in that, but I don't know that I think that that's the worst problem to see. I think the other has to do with the lot itself and how the lot is used by patrons and the hours. But it concerns me much less with people driving down the street. That's modern life that we have. People drive down all our streets all the time. You could have anything go up next to you. You could have a neighbor decide to move next door to you who likes to party in their backyard, and they like to party till 11 and 12 o'clock at night. It's there. They can do that. They can absolutely do that. The issue is it affects me and the other person on the other side to do that. But I don't think these are the same problem. People driving down the streets. So I guess I'm not as concerned about the right in, right out as I am. I'm much more concerned about the behavior inside the parking lot and how that can be mitigated for the neighborhood. So I'll just be straightforward about that. Commissioner Hoffman.
Thanks, Chair Rose. I think to that point, and it was something that I was going to mention earlier. I think one could make a good argument that these parking lots may help with the issues that Commissioner Uditsky discussed regarding the activity on Spring Road. I mean, I live in the area, I walk that all the time, and he's absolutely correct. You know, after 6 p.m., it's you know, kind of a free-for-all with people pulling in and out of the parking spaces that are on the street, the people running across from the city lot to get their pizza, et cetera, et cetera. I think these parking lots may help to distribute parking more in the area and help to alleviate some of that congestion that you see during the peak hours. So just wanted to make that comment regarding that.
Yeah, and there is a lot. I mean, I actually drove down there today between 5:15 and 5:30, and I think you see people, I was coming from the south, so you see people stop at that stop sign right by the Prairie Path. And then, I mean, this is kind of a traffic issue. As soon as people stop, why we don't have a lot of stop signs. You know, it took us some time to get up to that stop sign, and then as soon as people pass that, they wanted to just drive on. And that's where you see, and then that's when you come into that Roberto's area. So Commissioner Uditsky.
Sorry about that. So one of the things that I wanted to mention too, and I had read this in the petitioner's responses and then had to go verify it in the comprehensive plan. And forgive me, I don't think anyone's mentioned it yet tonight, but you know, our comprehensive plan specifically states Spring Road Business District land use recommendations proposed by the 6 groups for the Spring Road Business District sub-area are identified below, one of which is provide more parking, especially if the areas develop more intense uses. The following areas were proposed for additional parking: single-family homes behind the commercial uses east of Spring Road, especially south of Eggleston Avenue. So I mean, this is something that was clearly contemplated at the time of development of the comprehensive plan. So I don't think that it's, you know, any great surprise necessarily that, you know, we find it before us. Doesn't change the fact, obviously, that we need to go through our process, or that, you know, there could be issues with the traffic, you know, et cetera, et cetera. But I did just want to point that out.
Thank you, Commissioner Uditsky. Yeah, that's true. It says, right, the vacant parcel behind Roberto's restaurant should be developed as a commercial use associated with the restaurant. It says that on page 41 of the comprehensive plan. So that certainly, I would say the 6th standard, is this application is definitely not contrary to the objectives of the current comprehensive plan. So that seems clear. Commissioner Snyder?
Thank you, Chair Rose. Yes, I'm glad we're discussing the comprehensive plan. I have a little bit of a different take on that. I really have spent a lot of time reviewing the comprehensive plan, reading through it. You know, it really is a document that embodies the values expressed by the community. And it's a result of a thorough years-long process, which included a high level of public involvement. It establishes the long-range vision for Elmhurst and our broader goals and objectives. It's our policy guide and articulates a clearly defined set of principles used to address the land use and development, right? And so it is arguably the most important tool that the Zoning and Planning Commission has at its disposal to offer, which offers guidance on how to balance the growth and development and the ensuing rise of competing private and public interests. So, you know, there are a few things that stood out to me reviewing the document, one of which is in Chapter 3, a stated goal is to maintain strong residential neighborhoods and promote development patterns that ensure their viability and aesthetic appeal, with the objective stated to protect single-family residential areas from encroachment by land uses and traffic, which may create adverse impacts. Now, the Spring Road sub-area plan in particular states that the pending future development proposals neighboring residential parcels to, like Commissioner Uditsky pointed out, could serve to expand parking or new mixed uses. But what really is pointed out is that the increased commercial demand may necessitate additional municipal parking. It further states that if sufficient demand exists, the city should consider expanding public parking in the area. And it specifically recommends that shared parking be encouraged. I think those are really important qualifiers. This notion of private parking versus public parking, it speaks to the greater public good, or is this a private good? You know, we have these competing interests. And we're really looking to balance these public-private interests. So the sketch area plan appendix goes on to say that the Eggleston segment should be redeveloped for residential use, but that alternatively, mixed-use development could extend further on the north side of Eggleston. And as Commissioner Uditsky pointed out, that those particular parcels on the south side of Eggleston were called out for potentially parking. Now, the 6 sketch plan proposals themselves, though, really speak to the greater intention for the development of the area and illustrate how parking development or mixed-use development might take shape if it were to occur at all. And what really stands out is how the parcels are identified for use in relationship to one another and how such use creates a public benefit. And in every single sketch plan proposal, the 3 R1 lots on the south side of Eggleston and east of Spring are all envisioned to be of the same use, whether it's parking, mixed use, or single family. And these lots together may or may not be grouped in use with the isolated vacant lot. So it's very clear that the intention would be to develop the block of the 3 R1 zone lots on the south side of Eggleston in a unified way. I think this is a really important concept. So the sketch area plan really avoids cherry picking individual R1 parcels or residential parcels, and it avoids calling out these individual parcels for development separately from one another. So it either protects the single family use collectively or eliminates the single family use collectively for those residential lots on the south side of Eggleston. So, you know, just kind of going back to the theme of the public good, and what really comes out of this part of the comprehensive plan to me is the desire and benefit of public parking should the commercial demand necessitate it. So, you know, I think that the applicants claim to be serving a public good by developing these 2 lots for their private use is really limited, because there's no guarantee that Roberto's patrons will bypass the convenience of available street parking or the public parking lot across the way in favor of either of their 2 lots. There's no guarantee that that's going to happen. And number 2, the proposed parking lots will be reserved exclusively for Roberto's patrons, shutting out the public. And number 3, as stated during the testimony, the Marici family is really looking to increase capacity, and they're planning to remodel Roberto's in order to address functional issues that currently prevent them from hosting larger events and restaurant operations simultaneously. So, you know, I really think that I think there's a case that could be made that this is not in alignment to the comprehensive plan, because the comprehensive plan really talks about municipal parking, public parking, shared parking be encouraged, not private parking. There is nowhere in the comprehensive plan that articulates or encourages the development of private parking for exclusive use of any single business anywhere in that sub area plan for Spring Road. So I guess I would have to respectfully disagree about the comprehensive plan objectives being met. I think that is questionable, and I'd love to hear the opinion of some other commissioners. Thank you.
Commissioner Burns.
Sure. So this is a very interesting issue on the comprehensive plan, because in particular, there's no doubt that it actually does say, just in terms of land use, not who's sponsoring the land use, but what the land use would be, that there would be some contemplation of parking or commercial uses east of Spring Road along Eggleston. Now, I think Commissioner Snyder's point is well taken, that this interpretation, drawing on other parts of the comprehensive plan, that the long-term recommendation would be that any additional parking would be municipal parking, is well taken. But one of the issues in terms of making those lots on the, say, on the south side of Eggleston, sort of an all or nothing proposition, is that two of the lots have been improved with newer homes. The first two homes west of the townhouses are newer homes. And so there's not going to be a redevelopment of those for many years to come. So we're just left with a practical issue of what to do with the remaining lots. So I think I would agree that in a more ideal world of Spring Road, that if there were to be parking east of Spring Road on Eggleston, that it would be municipal parking. But I think that the comprehensive plan still does contemplate that there would be parking as a land use serving the commercial on Spring Road, regardless of whether it's municipal or privately owned. In other words, I'm just making that distinction as the actual land use, that it's parking serving commercial, that is called out in the comprehensive plan. As a policy matter, I believe that a good argument could be made that the city perhaps should have looked at these for municipally owned lots, but they haven't. And just to kind of tag on to this idea of what I think the city should do, is the parking spot on the east side of Spring that is the furthest north next to coming up to Eggleston. For years, I've thought that should be no parking. Right. They should extend the no parking area further south on the outside of the street. The next time I see Jim Grabowski, I'll mention it, or maybe Mike Kopp can mention it to him, but I just don't think that's a good place for people to park.
You know, there is precedence for that. When you see Adele coming out into York Road, south of the tracks, by what is now, it's a new restaurant that is there on the west side of the road. They removed one of those parking places there for that very same reason, that you just couldn't see. So we do have some precedents for that kind of action around town in several kinds of places. So it's a good idea. Mike Kopp is listening, so perhaps he'll pass it on right away. You don't even have to talk to him. He's here. So Commissioner Uditsky.
Yeah, interesting conversation with the comprehensive plan. And I would have to respectfully disagree with Commissioner Snyder. I think you have to recall that obviously we use the comprehensive plan as a guide, right? And if you dig into what is the purpose of having, parking back there, it's to relieve congestion, on Spring Road. I don't think that the intention was, to echo what Commissioner Burns said, that, well, it has to be municipal parking. I think if you look at Spring Road and you look at the heaviest draw, most likely, and the heaviest user in terms of number of people, that's Roberto's, right? So in this case, yes, it's private. If you recall, actually, I asked them that question during their presentation as to whether or not it would be public or private. But given that they are, the heaviest user in that immediate area, I think that not only does it comply with the exact language in the comprehensive plan, but would actually serve the purpose as well, which would be to ultimately relieve congestion and traffic on Spring Road.
Other comments from commissioners? Commissioner Pittman.
Thank you, Chair Rose. Yeah, I wanted to just say that I also, considered what Commissioner Snyder did in looking at the comprehensive plan. And the question I asked myself was this, in absence of all these parcels being together, is it still applicable that somebody should put parking here? And to what Commissioner Burns stated, yeah, those other parcels aren't going to become available anytime in the near future. So that option is pretty much off the table. So given that, I came to the conclusion that yes, it was reasonable to think that part of that, the adjacent part of it, could be developed as parking, that was a reasonable use of that land given what was demonstrated in the comprehensive plan. But I certainly thought of it and thought of it in the way that Commissioner Snyder did. But I came to the conclusion that Commissioner Burns and Commissioner Uditsky did, that it is something that is reasonable. And also the whole public-private, I think that there could be an argument made that there is a public benefit to a private individual making the investment and not using public funds to fund a parking lot. Again, to what Commissioner Uditsky had mentioned, the biggest user, the biggest burden on parking in that area is Roberto's. And so if they are providing a parking lot to pull away some of that, I think that does provide some public benefit as well.
Other comments? Commissioner Burns?
To kind of go back to another threshold-like issue that I just want to get into our deliberation because obviously we want to have a completely rational basis for everything and to consider everything that's been put before us. The objectors raised the issue of whether the parking lots, in particular the north parking lot, are within 300 feet of the use that they serve. And the section of the ordinance is, I'll refer to it again as the scenic language, only says may be located within 300 feet of such use. And then it says what kind of districts it would be. But my point is that it doesn't say 300 feet to the entrance of the use served. And it doesn't say 300 feet of walking along public rights of way. And I've looked at a lot of other zoning ordinances in the last month or so from all over the country. And there are cases where it's specified that it be to the entrance of the use served. There are others that specify that it be a walking distance or driving distance along public rights of way. There are many that don't specify how you measure it at all. And for my purposes, and I've been involved in real estate professionally for over 30 years, if somebody said within 300 feet, it's sort of like our standard of notifying neighbors within a certain radius, right? It's as the crow flies. Say, here's the point, here's the location of the parcel that is the subject of the zoning request. We notify people within a certain radius, just take that distance straight out in every direction. It's not walking distance or some other calculation. So in this case, if you take the nearest point of the North Eggleston proposed lot and the nearest point of the subject served lot, the site that's it's serving, and just draw a line that is the most direct line, it's well under 300 feet. And the south lot would be closer on that basis. So I just wanted to address that and say that I think that that's satisfied. One other issue is to go back to this, whether it's a structure or not. I did look at this case again, Nonnen, and for Kiki, I'll spell this, Nonnen, M as in man, A-N-N, Nonnen, v. Lucky Stores. And Attorney Day mentioned that in one of his letters and in his presentation. That decision actually does not identify parking lots as structures. In addition, the Illinois Public Statute, I'm just going to flip through to see if I can find where it's referred to. But I can't find it quickly, but it's ILCS 65, 11, 13, something else, right? Which is the Adjoining Landowners Act. That mentions the word structure 4 times, but it never identifies parking lots as structures. In fact, the word parking doesn't occur in that public law. As a professional in real estate, if somebody invited me to say, look at a property in Elk Grove Village and said, there's 2 structures there, and I showed up and there's one of your standard single tenant, 6,000 foot industrial buildings in the industrial area of Centex, and I saw one building, I said, where's the other structure? If they said, well, you're standing on it, I'd have to question their use of the term structure. The other issue is that we have a pretty well-established record of how we interpret structures for the 30% limitation. If we were to adopt the notion that paving, that well-designed, constructed paving, and this would apply not only to parking lots, but say patios, driveways. I had a driveway put in, the city sends an inspector. There are base courses, surface, the whole thing is nicely engineered. If that was all counted as part of the 30% ratio calculation, then except for the eastmost house on the north side of Eggleston, in the stretch we're talking about, all the other houses would have lot coverages well over 30%, so they would all become non-conforming. And actually, a lot of houses in Elmhurst would become non-conforming if we use that standard. I don't believe it's a reasonable standard, and I don't believe a parking lot, a surface parking lot, is a structure for our purposes. And those are my reasons for saying that.
Okay. And I think we know our city staff agrees with that interpretation, which makes sense to me. So other comments from commissioners? Anyone want to talk specifically about this issue of parking lots being a structure? I mean, I think it was raised, but I think it makes some sense. So, okay, Commissioner Snyder.
You know, on the issue of parking lots being structures, I really feel like city staff did an excellent job explaining our historical approach to this. And I think that any deviation from our historical approach would really be unfair. So in order to maintain consistency in the way we approach parking lots and how they're defined and considered for our purposes, I think we absolutely should follow the city staff's guidance and recommendation to continue considering it not a structure. I think they did a great job articulating that point already and covering it. And then I would just want to jump over to standard number 4 as well. I also think that city staff did an excellent job addressing the flooding, drainage issues and everything around there. And just wanted to say that I would agree that that standard has been met as well. So I think the city staff has done an excellent job addressing some of these standards and doing some of that work for us. And anyway, that's all.
Mm-hmm. I think it would be a seismic change in this community where we're to begin considering parking pavement as a structure. And I don't know that this community would support that kind of change. So Commissioner Garland.
Yeah, I think it just I just like to go on record to just express the confidence that I have in City Attorney Acker and City Planner Franz and the work that they did to lay all this out. And I know that Attorney Daniels, was set a tone in his written correspondence that would strongly suggest otherwise. I would just like to say for the record that the confidence that I have in city staff and their assessment is very high, and I completely agree with it.
Thank you, Commissioner Garland. Commissioner Burns, you had a comment you wanted to make?
Yes, thank you, Chair Rose. There's one other issue I wanted to cover too, which was raised by the objectors, which was the setback issue. And there was a graphic in the objectors' PowerPoint that showed that based on the average of the block method, in other words, if we took what the setbacks were for the homes on the block, that the north lot should be 36.58 feet, not 25 feet of setback. The south lot would be 30.57 feet, but properly planned, and it's quote unquote properly planned, would be 35.54 feet. Now, city attorney and staff agree with the applicant. The staff cited section 22.81 D3, saying that in residential districts, quote, historically, staff has applied the setbacks of the primary use to the parking lot, which has mostly been for churches and schools, not the average of the block.
Mm-hmm.
So the setback for parking lots in office and commercial districts is 25 feet. There is no stated setback for parking lot located in a residential district serving a commercial use. So we take from the ordinance that the primary use being served in other circumstances dictates what the setback would be. In an office and commercial districts, there is no average of the block method. It's just 25 feet. So I agree with city staff and city attorney on that.
Thank you. Other comments from commissioners on any aspect of this? I just want to make sure that we have adequately discussed all the issues. If there's not, I would prefer to not leave something hanging out there. Someone has some concern about. Okay, Commissioner Burns.
Just a quick question. I know we really haven't decided whether we would vote on a motion as submitted or with further conditions at this point, anyway. So we can either say the conditions we want, for example, as I proposed, is that they definitely have opaque fences for the east sides of the parking lot and maybe even part of the Eggleston frontage, but at least those east sides to fully screen themselves from the residences to the east. And then hours of operation. Then there was some discussion that it would be difficult to accommodate hours of operation, but I think it's still something we could consider.
Right.
Can we, in our report to DPZ, say, yeah, we recommend that, this sounds like a cop-out, that they consider hours of operation limitations?
I mean, we can, but I think we can clearly say that this parking lot, especially the lighting, we have to consider lighting as well, that to go past 11 o'clock, we have a number of ordinances that don't really allow lighting on commercial buildings that are adjacent to residential, to have that lighting go past a certain time. So to have lighting on a parking lot that goes to 1 a.m. Seems not really consistent with some of our other ordinances that we have. So I think we would be open to some, certainly some conditions based on that. I think lighting is another thing we really want to throw into that mix of potential conditions that we would want to place on that. From this discussion, it seems clear a number of commissioners are very interested in establishing some conditions on this, either one of these or both of these applications. So it might be worthwhile to hear what some of those might be or discuss. Categorically, we would be talking hours of operation, fencing, I'll throw in lighting, and I don't know if there's other, there was discussion about ingress and egress, in and out, restricting how that might go. So I don't know if there are other broad general types of conditions people want to consider. Commissioner Garland.
Thanks, Chair Rose. Yeah, the only thing that I would add based on the concerns from the homeowners and the safety elements of it is, you know, curbs are fine, fence is fine, but I know that there was a concern about, you know, the possibility of a car going through the curb, through the fence and into the home. The fences are pretty close, particularly on the west side of the homes and the south parking lot. The westernly most home there, that parking lot is awfully close. And I think that even, you know, on the back lot of that south lot, you know, when you start looking at the townhomes there, and I know that there's perhaps not parking there, but I think just some safety measures in terms of perhaps those parking posts, and not to kind of over-engineer it, but I think that just to address the concerns if we're talking about conditions in this way. So,
okay. Commissioner Hoffman.
I guess to Commissioner Garland's point, and I guess a question and a point of clarification, is the option that the petitioner brought forward at the last meeting with the different configuration to the south lot also in play as a potential condition? That created some additional space between the parking and the residences.
Right, and that certainly is, from my perspective, a preferred plan. Let me ask Eileen.
From what I recall, the petitioner did bring that forward, but at the end of the last meeting, they were choosing to move forward with the original proposal. They are present if you want to have them clarify that, but that is what I recall.
Okay. In fact, I will ask them to clarify that. I'll ask the applicant to clarify which plan are you choosing to go forward with, the optional plan that shifted that south parking lot a little south and east, or your original plan?
The optional plan was submitted to the Plan Commission for consideration. Our application is for the original plans as modified. They do include the turnaround, and we do pledge fencing or landscaping, whatever it is the Plan Commission recommends associated with it. We've also made clear that the optional plan can be directed. You can direct the petitioner to comply with the optional plan because it's a configuration we are capable of proceeding with.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. We appreciate that. So to clarify, their application is for that original plan, but we could use that as a condition to say the optional plan, we would want to establish that as a condition of approval because they are capable of doing it. Commissioner Pittman.
Thanks, Chair Rose. I guess I just wanted to get clarification that I think there was a question the last time whether this was a minor change that would require resubmittal. That was part of the hang up too. So I just wanted to make sure that yes, we could require that as a condition of the conditional use.
Right, we can ask the city attorney. It would be my judgment that that is a minor enough change that it would not require resubmittal, but let me ask city attorney on that one if he wants to weigh in on that.
Yes, I would agree with your assessment, Chair Rose, that you could do it as a condition.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So, I'm sorry, Mr. Daniel. We're not going to be taking any further comment. I'm sorry, unless I want to move on at this point and ask about any of these conditions if commissioners wish to take them one by one. Commissioner Burns.
Yes, Chair Rose. If I could suggest, we really rarely have an application where there's a number of potential conditions. I mean, it has happened, but it's rarely. So I'm wondering if we put forward one condition at a time and saying that if we were to approve the underlying motion, would we collectively or would we not collectively not agree on a certain condition? And we just go through these conditions one at a time. And I think—
So you're asking for some, it was my intention to go through them one at a time.
Right, but would we go like using rules of order, like would we make a motion for consideration of a particular recited condition?
Are you asking that we would first get some sense whether people were willing to support it if these conditions were put in?
Right.
It's always tricky to do that.
Because otherwise, I'm thinking that there are so many permutations of the motion with one or another of the conditions that how would we determine which conditions would go with?
Yeah, I'm going to call us back to Redeemer Lutheran. We got into lots of sticky waters there by saying, well, if you do this, and then if you do this, and if you do that. So I'm going to ask the city attorney to weigh in on that. We have the primary application in front of us. We know that the applicant is willing to consider Plan B, the alternate plan. We don't know if any of these other conditions they are willing to consider or they say we're not going to do it. Nice that you do it, and how we would proceed with that. I'm going to ask city attorney to please weigh in on that for us.
Yeah, one of the techniques used by prior Commissioner Whistler was at this stage of the deliberations, they would formally ask the petitioner whether or not they would agree to accept the conditions that you guys are discussing. Sounds as if a number of them have already been agreed to by way of their alternative submission. So for purposes of procedure, I believe that you want to have one vote, and the vote should be whether or not it should be approved and then with conditions, right? So I think it's one vote, but you have to have the conclusion of it be that it's a vote with conditions.
So we would vote on the main application, and if it was but if some people didn't want to vote for it unless there were the conditions, how does that operate?
Yeah, I would suggest that you need to have a discussion as to the consensus of the conditions that everyone would agree to.
Okay.
And then to the extent that you have conditions that were not agreed to by the petitioner, that you formally request them as to whether or not they would agree to before you reached your vote. That's how Daryl Whistler used to do it.
Right. And
not to say that you can't do it differently, Chair Rose, but
Daryl Whistler never got in trouble for that.
Yeah,
so,
Daryl never got in trouble with that one. So, anyways,
yeah. So
again,
I think,
to the extent that you want to have clarity as to the vote, and you want to make sure that everyone agrees to the conditions that you're voting on.
Right. So so to bring this back to what Commissioner Burns is raising, I think that we can articulate what these are, and these are the ones that I have heard: lighting, fencing, hours of operation, and there was some discussion about ingress and egress, west only as egress occurring. Those were the basic areas that I heard. Were there others that Commissioner wanted to do? Commissioner Pittman.
Thanks, Chair Rose. Yeah, I think also we need to decide what height the fence is. Is it a 6 or an 8-foot opaque fence that we're looking for? The bollards were brought up. And then the plan B. And then I think the probably the usage, the hours of usage would coincide with when the lighting has to go off.
Right. So really that kind of fits into that. So it's.
And also I know that we discussed that the right turn, left turn, but
right.
I think that, I mean, I'd be willing to remove that based on comments from Commissioner Uditsky and yourself. I definitely think that, you know, the amount of cars coming out of those parking lots at the same time is going to be low. It's not that every car is going to be leaving that lot trying to get out on that street at once. So the opportunity to make a right or a left there is probably fine.
Okay. So then the categories we're really looking at are lighting. And these are all interconnected, of course. Lighting, hours of operation, fencing, plan B, and then if anyone really wants to talk about, I think would have lower priority that, you know, the turning out only onto spring. So we could discuss that to see if there's some thought about that. So these seem to be the general areas that people are interested in establishing some conditions on.
And the parking bollards, the bollards.
The bollards. I'm going to consider that as part of fencing. That's kind of part of that whole issue. So are there any other ones as a broad category? Commissioner Snyder?
No, I didn't see any additional
okay.
conditions that were a broad category.
Okay, so I'm going to turn to the applicant then, okay, and advise them that these are the conditional uses that we are going to consider, not conditional uses, these are the conditions that we want to put onto the, which would be lighting, hours of operation, fencing that includes bollards, fencing height, bollards, et cetera, plan B, and I don't sense, we'll talk about it, but the notion of exiting from the parking lots, requiring exiting towards spring. So the question is, are you willing to accept some of those conditions as we talk about them?
I have a plan B. We are certainly willing to accept that as a condition. Hours of operation we have proposed, and we're certainly willing to live with whatever the city has applied to the parking lot we've currently been using across the street. Lighting, we will certainly comply with the lighting and the hours of operation. The bollards we have proposed ourselves, the fencing, whatever height the city thinks is appropriate, as well as the material we are willing to live with. The ingress egress, I think, is within the city's control, regardless of whether or not it's a condition. The city posts the signs in terms of traffic control coming in and out of this lot. And from our perspective, the better approach would be to let the city traffic engineers decide what's necessary as time evolves.
Yeah, I think that makes some sense. So, okay, Commissioner Pittman.
Sorry, Chair Rose. There are two other things, and I guess I just bring them up because part of what the applicant submitted mentioned two items that they were willing to do as sort of concessions. One was in their plan B, if they did that, that would create an opportunity for the Wild Meadows Trace to negotiate an easement. And then also, they also mentioned the Eisminger's home, that they would potentially connect the dry well to the storm sewers. So I'm not sure if that's something we need to talk about, or.
I would say that those are issues that would be beyond the conditional uses. Those would be things that could be negotiated, I think, afterwards.
Okay, thanks.
That would be my perspective on those. Okay, let's take them and just see. Let's go with the easier one, which is fencing. It seems like there's a strong consensus among commission members. Fencing is a necessary component of this, not just greenery. Greenery might be nice to add later, but fencing, or to add, that might be the additive to that. But the fencing is the one that would be required, fencing in these bollards. And that would include a discussion of either 6 foot or 8 foot. I personally am in favor of a higher one. I think that that provides more privacy, visual privacy. It also gives it a more kind of enclosed thought. So let me throw that out, fencing, and what anyone's thoughts are about that as a conditional use. Commissioner Burns.
I agree, 8 foot opaque fencing.
Okay. I'm not going to impose my own design aesthetic, is that it be something other than white plastic, but 8 foot I'm for. Commissioner Garland.
Yeah, I would agree with that 8 foot opaque, and I would say from the bollard perspective that it's on this may be all the parking spaces, but on those parking spaces that are facing the home.
Okay. Anyone else have any thoughts on that? Commissioner Snyder.
I definitely agree that if this moves forward, the condition of an 8 foot opaque fence would really be the best option in terms of buffering for the homeowners.
Commissioner Hoffman.
Just a point of clarification, because it was brought up prior about the fencing potentially wrapping and being on Eggleston as well. I actually am not in favor of that based upon what Commissioner Snyder brought forward earlier. I think it's helpful for patrons as they approach the parking lots to be able to potentially see the available parking. So I would suggest that it be open on that side.
I think that makes sense. I would agree with that. Anyone else have any thoughts about fencing? Such a contentious issue some days. But, okay, so we would be agreed then, there's some consensus that that would be one of the conditions we would place on this would be an 8 foot opaque fence. That would be fine. So we can, when we go to, we'll have to make formal motions on all of these, but I'm just going to go through them first to get some ideas of this. So let's do the next easiest one, I think, is Plan B. I want to suggest that that is a far superior plan, and that would be a condition that I would want to see put on for approval, would be that. It removes really the parking lot. It gives much greater space between two different homes. It might also in some ways provide better view. If you see that parking lot angled, you'll be able to see, are there spaces available there, et cetera. And both of these include turnarounds. So I would suggest Plan B is the superior one. Let me ask what anyone else thinks about this. Commissioner Snyder.
Thank you, Chair Rose. Yes, I completely agree that Plan B is the superior plan and offers a really nice compromise. And I really, when I saw Plan B, it just made so much sense to me to develop the parking lot in conjunction with the renovation of the building itself, so that it really develops as a cohesive unit, because this parking lot is serving that building. And so, you know, the fact that it provides significantly more setback for 2 single family homes and for the townhomes to the east, I really think is a big benefit. And I do as well think it's a superior plan, and I would want this condition imposed.
Yeah. Anyone else have any thoughts on that? Yeah, going back to fencing though, I want to go back to Commissioner Garland's issue around trust. So I think the 8 foot fence is minimal. I personally would like to see them do landscaping on the exterior of that as a friendly neighborhood gesture. That's so people are not looking at just a fence, but they also could look at greenery. So I think that we can talk about that. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts about that. Commissioner Callaway.
Yeah, Chair Rose, I was trying to figure out how to get the landscaping piece in here because I would agree, it doesn't make sense for it to be on the interior, you know, for people parking their cars to see it. I would agree. I mean, an 8-foot fence, an opaque fence can be very domineering. I think having some, you know, some sort of arborvitae or other greenery on the outside of the fence would really be an added element that I think would, you know, would really enhance the look of that.
Mhm. Even the infamous Lombardy poplars, you know, made so famous in Monet's work would be lovely. So Commissioner Burns.
I just wanted to mention, I had the same thought as Commissioner Callaway. Put something, some landscape element on the, say the Eisminger side of the fence.
Absolutely.
And similarly for the other fencing.
Yeah, I just think that, so that I think goes some way towards Commissioner Garland's concern about how do you trust, how do you be a good neighbor with that? So let's talk about hours of operation and lighting, which are two interconnected comments. Commissioner Snyder.
Yes, I just want to comment about the landscaping in addition to the fence. And I was wondering, would we be suggesting that the fence be further set back from the property line so that the landscaping, the greenery would be installed on, not on the neighbor's property, but on the parking lot property?
Well, it couldn't, yeah, it could not be installed on the neighbor's property, it would have to be installed. So however they do that, whether that's to bring it in 1 foot, you know, some amount of time in order to do that, it would absolutely be on the petitioner's property.
Okay.
It would have to be.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Oh, so then I might as well just comment as well, since I have the floor, about the lighting and the hours of operation. You know, I'm wondering if we, and this really brings to issue something that Commissioner Callaway brought up, is the patron who parks in a parking lot at 9 o'clock. And then they come out to find the lights turned off, the parking lot is effectively closed, and then something happens. Is there a safety issue there where lighting isn't being provided? You know, the illumination isn't being provided. I mean, I guess I'm unclear about how all of that's going to be policed and managed, because you know, the hours of operation can be posted and the lights can be turned off, but really patrons are going to do what patrons do. And if they're having a good time at the bar, you know, they're not going to be checking their clock and clearing out at 10 o'clock or whatever posted hours we put up there. So I guess I'm a little concerned about any of the safety issues that might arise with people.
Well, it seems to me that if people are duly warned that this parking lot closes at this time, the lights are turned off at this time, I mean, I think that they have a responsibility themselves with that. I mean, that's my perception. I don't know what anyone else thinks about that. But I'm concerned about, you know, we have really codes around lighting in numerous businesses where they have to be off by a particular time. Is that correct, Eileen?
I mean, actually, the only time I can really think of that has to do with signs adjacent to residential.
Correct, right. Illuminated signs. So they have to be turned off. So it seems to me that I have no trouble in saying that because of some of the unique circumstances of this, to have it off at 11 o'clock, that makes some sense to me. We have noise ordinances that say, you know, really, if you're having an outdoor party, don't you have to kind of keep the noise down after about 11 o'clock?
I mean, we do have a noise ordinance. It's different in different parts of the city and different requirements for different types of decibels and noises. Yes.
Right. And some of that so I'm going to suggest the 11 o'clock time and it be posted and that's what we think about it. So Commissioner Snyder.
Thank you, Chair Rose. So if I heard correctly, the petitioner indicated that they would accept the condition of the hours of operation as long as it were in alignment with the hours of operation for the public parking across the way. So I guess I'm looking for clarification on what those hours of operation are for our public parking across the way.
Eileen,
do you know?
Eileen, can you give us an idea what those are?
I'm actually not sure what those are across the way. Mike, do you know?
I'm not sure either. It's either 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, I believe. It's like no overnight parking is what it is, but I believe it's posted at 2 o'clock.
Yeah.
That's right.
I still would suggest the 11 o'clock time, and that patrons who come in, when they know it's posted, there should by that time be adequate parking in the streets. You can also set it up where it's, people will learn about this as time goes on. So, Commissioner Pittman.
Yeah, I support the 11 o'clock. I think that, again, I mentioned there might be some growing pains in the beginning, but people are going to get accustomed to what the times are that they can use that lot. And they're going to know if they plan to stay longer and they need to go park across the street where they can, park till 2 a.m. And it might require Roberto's talking to the patrons. They're still roaming around at 11. Hey, if your car's in the back, you got to move it. So I think 11 makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else have any comments? I'm sorry, Mr. Daniel, but we are not open to public comment right now. Sorry. Any other commissioner have comments? Okay. How about lighting? Anyone have any thought that the lighting, we understand the hours of operation, but the lighting which is connected with that, I'm going to suggest that that be at the same time, that be at 11. Anyone have any thoughts on that? Commissioner Snyder?
I would agree that the lighting and the hours of operation go hand in hand. I think that's a no-brainer. That should absolutely be tied together. So yes, if the hours of operation are set to 11, that is absolutely when the lighting should be turned off as well.
Okay. All right. So let me ask if commissioners, if you are ready to vote on this, or do you, and I'm going to suggest, and City Attorney Andy Acker will help me and walk me through this, that we first need to address each one of these conditions that we want to put on this and vote on each one of those. And they become added to the vote on the conditional use permit itself. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it suggests that the final vote that you have is the conditional use along with the conditions that everyone agrees to. That should be the final vote of the night.
Okay, so we'll vote on
adjourning.
Oh, I thought I'd stay here forever. So
the never-ending hearing. Okay.
Never-ending hearing. So really, we want to first vote on. We'll need a motion and a second for each one of these. I'm going to take first lighting. Someone wants to make the motion that this would be the condition that we would set on approval of the conditional use permit itself. Commissioner Pittman, could you make that motion?
Okay, I make the motion that lighting be shut off at 11 o'clock at the property every night.
Okay, and a second? Commissioner Garland, any further discussion? Eileen, please call the roll.
Commissioner Pittman?
Did Commissioner Callaway have something?
Oh, Commissioner Callaway,
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I just want to be clear. I thought we were taking lighting and hours of operation together. I'm just wondering, and I know Commissioner Pittman made a motion, but I'm just wanted to make sure that the motion was as comprehensive as she had intended.
Well, we could, let me go, we could do two things. We could add a friendly amendment to that, or Commissioner Pittman, would you like to restate your motion?
Sure, if we want to have them together, or do not.
Well, you know, there's a part of me that says I like them separate because it's, you know, something can happen to one or the other of them, but logically they go together. They absolutely logically do go together. But Commissioner Callaway, can you talk further about why you would want them to adjust together?
It's no preference for me. Certainly, I thought that when we were having the discussion, we were talking about them together. So I just thought for purposes of, you know, of the motions, you know, and maybe there is no motion in terms of hours of operation. I mean, I just want to be clear what we're voting on, but
I'm
you know,
go ahead.
It may make sense to consider them separately. And
yeah, I would say it's cleaner. Let's consider them separately, and then we know logically they go together. Of course they do. It makes some sense, but
the motion's been made and there's been a second. I would suggest that you undertake the vote.
Let's do it. Okay.
I do not have one.
Commissioner Pittman.
Yes.
Commissioner Garland.
Yes.
Commissioner Burns.
Yes.
Commissioner Callaway.
yes.
Commissioner Hoffman.
Yes.
Commissioner Snyder.
Yes.
Commissioner Uditsky.
Yes.
Chair Rose.
Yes. Okay, we'll take the next one. I'd want a motion around the hours of operation that the parking lot not be able to operate past 11 o'clock as well. Can I have a motion and a second for that? Commissioner Callaway moves. Commissioner Snyder seconds. Any further discussion? Commissioner Garland.
So it would shut down at 11, and when would it open? So just in terms of just solidifying the bookending of the operational hours then.
I don't know that we discussed that. Commissioner Snyder?
Yes, I do recall. In fact, I reviewed some of the video today that the petitioner had stated that they wouldn't need to use the parking lot until 9 or 10 the following morning. So the petitioner had stated that time frame. So I think we could safely say 9 a.m. just based on the testimony that was provided during the hearing.
Thank you for that reminder. Okay.
I will accept that friendly amendment to my motion.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Garland. The bookends. So I'm going to ask you to call the roll.
Commissioner Callaway.
Yes.
Commissioner Snyder.
Yes.
Commissioner Burns.
Yes.
Commissioner Garland.
Yes.
Commissioner Hoffman.
Yes.
Commissioner Pittman.
Yes.
Commissioner Uditsky.
Yes.
Chair Rose.
Yes, that passes. And the last one, no, not the last one, fencing. Would someone make a motion that reflects our consensus that it be an 8-foot opaque fence with, if you wish to make it with landscaping on the exterior portion of that fence, I would suggest that be a part of it, that it be an 8-foot opaque fence. So who would like to make that motion? And second, Commissioner Garland. And a
I'd like
second.
to make a motion.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I'd like
please.
to make a motion for an 8-foot opaque fence with landscaping on the resident side.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Burns, you seconded that?
Yes.
Okay. Any further discussion on that?
No.
Seeing none, I'll ask Eileen to call the roll.
Commissioner Garland.
Yes.
Commissioner Burns,
Yes.
Commissioner Callaway,
Yes.
Commissioner Hoffman,
Yes.
Commissioner Pittman,
Yes.
Commissioner Snyder,
Yes.
Commissioner Uditsky,
Yes.
Chair Rose.
Yes. And the last one is the substitution of, I don't know if we call it Plan B or the alternate plan for the original plan that was suggested. So who would like to make a motion? Commissioner Snyder?
I move that we impose the condition that the applicant pursue building alternate Plan B as they presented.
And is there a second? Commissioner Hoffman seconds. Is there any further discussion? Eileen, will you please call the roll?
Commissioner Snyder,
Yes.
Commissioner Hoffman,
Yes.
Commissioner Burns,
Yes.
Commissioner Callaway,
Yes.
Commissioner Garland,
Yes.
Commissioner Pittman,
Yes.
Commissioner Uditsky,
Yes.
Chair Rose.
Yes. So now we come to the main vote on these two conditional use permits, which we must take separately. So I want to make sure we've talked about every single one of the standards. The bollards.
I'm not sure if anyone wanted to add the bollards as a condition, the parking.
Oh, I thought we did that with fencing. No, let's talk bollards. So I'm going to ask Commissioner Garland, since bollards I know is near and dear to his heart, if he would make the motion that the fifth condition is that bollards be included on the interior of the parking lots.
I make a motion to have parking bollards at for all parking stalls facing residential.
Okay, and a second to that? Commissioner Pittman. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask Eileen to please call the roll.
Commissioner Garland,
Yes.
Commissioner Pittman,
Yes.
Commissioner Burns,
Yes.
Commissioner Callaway,
Yes.
Commissioner Hoffman,
Yes.
Commissioner Snyder,
Yes.
Commissioner Uditsky,
Yes.
Chair Rose.
Yes. So now we will come to the first conditional use permit to construct and operate a surface parking lot at 283 West Eggleston, which includes the vacated alley. What we need is a motion to approve with the additional conditions of lighting, hours of operation, fencing, the substitution of Plan B, and bollards as described in our previous votes. So can someone make that motion? Commissioner Burns, and do we have a second? Commissioner Uditsky. Commissioner Burns.
Having deliberated now for almost 2.5 hours, we've heard the testimony, and I believe we're ready to proceed with any further discussion in the vote.
Is there any further discussion on this? Seeing none. Oh, just a moment, Eileen. Yes.
I do have a question, a clarification, probably for Andy. You know, originally when we began, there was a motion and a second for the conditional use already. It was Commissioner Burns and Commissioner Snyder. Should that original motion be amended to include the conditions?
Or withdrawn?
Or withdrawn?
Yeah, I would suggest that the original motion be withdrawn. You now have voted on the various conditions and that those are now being incorporated by reference. So the original motion, I think, should be withdrawn and a new one proceed.
And who were those persons who made that original motion?
So the original motion for 283 was Commissioner Burns and Commissioner Snyder. And then the original motion for 272 was Commissioner Burns' motion, Commissioner Garland second.
Okay, let me ask Commissioner Burns and Commissioner Snyder, would you be willing to withdraw your original motion? Commissioner Burns?
Yes, I withdraw that motion.
Commissioner Snyder?
Yes, I would withdraw.
And I'm going to also ask you at the same time if you're willing to withdraw your original motion, Commissioner Burns and Commissioner Garland, for a conditional use permit to construct and operate surface parking lot at 272 and 276 West Eggleston.
Yes.
Commissioner Garland?
Yes.
Okay. So on the new motion, it was Commissioner Burns, and the second was
Commissioner Uditsky?
Commissioner Uditsky. Okay, any further discussion? Seeing none, I'm going to ask Eileen to please call the roll.
Commissioner Burns?
Yes.
Commissioner Uditsky?
Yes.
Commissioner Callaway?
Yes.
Commissioner Garland?
No.
Commissioner Hoffman?
Yes.
Commissioner Pittman?
Yes.
Commissioner Snyder?
No.
Chair Rose?
Yes. That passes. I would then ask for a motion to approve the conditional use permit to construct and operate a surface parking lot at 272 and 276 West Eggleston with the conditions imposed regarding lighting, hours of operation, fencing, the substitution of Plan B, and the addition of bollards. Can I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
So moved, Commissioner Burns, and a second.
Second.
Commissioner Garland? Thank you. All right, any additional discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask Eileen to please call the roll.
Commissioner Burns?
Yes.
Commissioner Garland?
No.
Commissioner Callaway?
Yes.
Commissioner Hoffman?
You're muted, Commissioner Hoffman.
Yes.
Commissioner Pittman?
Yes.
Commissioner Snyder?
No.
Commissioner Uditsky?
Yes.
Chair Rose?
Yes, that passes. So the two plats of subdivision are administrative. So this now goes to the Development Planning and Zoning Committee. And I know that they are, will look over this with a fine-tooth comb, and they will we will send a recommendation to them of approval of this based on these conditions that we are requesting be imposed on this. And from this point on, it goes to Development Planning and Zoning Committee and then to the full City Council. And when will that go to DPZ?
So I don't have the date for DPZ. We have new committees and we have a pretty potentially heavy agenda for May 24th. So I'm not expecting this to go on May 24th. I think it's more likely that it would go to DPZ June 14th, but I will confirm that.
Okay, thank you. So the applicant and interested parties, please keep looking on the city website. I think, and you'll get an idea when this will occur. And I want to thank everyone for their really thoughtful testimony, thoughtful objections, thoughtful analysis. It's a long process, but I'll go back to Commissioner Callaway once said, this is one of the more complicated cases that she'd seen as a commissioner, and she's been a commissioner for some amount of time. So it's a complicated case, and so it will move from there. Okay, we then will move on to our next item of business, which is other business. I'm going to ask Eileen, will you please talk a little bit about the implications of the governor's moving to a bridge phase and then a phase 5, what that means for us as a commission?
Yes. So as you all probably know, we're moving forward we're in the bridge to phase 5 now, and phase 5 would bring us back to our regular operations. As of right now, we're not aware of any permanent changes to the Open Meetings Act. We have not been given any information indicating that some of the ways we've been handling our meetings over Zoom and not having everyone present is going to continue. We're hoping to get some more direction on that over the next week or so as all these new things kind of unroll and come out. But there is a chance for our second meeting in June that we would no longer be able to operate remotely depending on how everything moves forward. So our June 1st meeting will still be the way that we have been operating. We'll still be in this bridge phase during that time. But after that, we may need to begin meeting in person again. So as soon as I have more information on that, I will pass it along. As soon as we learn more, we're trying to get more information from the state and see how this will play out. I know that the meeting over Zoom has provided better participation opportunities for the public and for our commissioners. So I think that's been the way in many other communities. So we're wondering if there might be some permanent changes made, or we may be going back to the way it was before. So we'll keep you posted.
Great, yeah. So a lot of changes. I mean, we are, if we were to return to in-person, we would still probably maintain social distancing, but probably not masks, we don't know. A lot of ifs that are gonna go into this. So the good news is we'll get to see each other face to face. The not so good news is that it may indeed affect attendance and participation. We'll see. I think you all have been tremendous, just tremendous in your attendance and participation in this past year in the Zoning Commission. So I applaud all of you for that. So we'll just see what goes on. We may not have any options for this. We just may not. So we will do the best we can. So any other business, Eileen?
No, that's it.
All right, can I have a motion to adjourn? Commissioner Pittman moves, Commissioner Uditsky seconds. We have to call the roll, so.
Commissioner Pittman.
Yes.
Commissioner Uditsky.
Yes.
Commissioner Burns.
Yes.
Commissioner Callaway.
Yes.
Commissioner Garland.
Yes.
Commissioner Hoffman.
Yes.
Commissioner Snyder.
Yes.
Chair Rose.
Yes, we are adjourned. Good night, everyone.
Good night.